I guess I should back up a little and tell you who I am before I sound like some bitter stranger on the internet. My name's Kate. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I was a pretty ordinary woman. I wasn't the type to chase drama. Honestly, I hated conflict. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood where people knew their neighbors, where gossip traveled faster than the mailman, and where everyone pretended to be polite even when they were silently judging. I was raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. She taught me to be independent, to never rely on anyone so much that I'd lose myself in the process. Her words stuck with me, but life has this cruel way of testing the very lessons you think you've mastered. By nature, I've always been nurturing. Friends used to joke that I had mom energy long before I ever thought of marriage. I was the one people came to when their hearts were broken, when they needed a shoulder to cry on, or when they just wanted someone to listen. I wore that like a badge of honor. But here's the funny thing, when you're the one who's always taking care of everyone else, people rarely stop to ask who's taking care of you. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 24. He was charming in that quiet, almost awkward way. Not the life of the party, but the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the only one in the room when he looked at you. He had these brown eyes that carried warmth, and a laugh that made people want to laugh along even when they didn't get the joke. I fell for him fast, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. At first, everything felt perfect. We'd go on late-night drives just to talk about our dreams. He wanted to start his own business one day, and I wanted a cozy little house with a big garden and maybe a golden retriever running around. It wasn't about big riches or flashy lifestyles for me. It was about stability, love, and building a home that felt safe. The first time I met his mom, Linda, I remember feeling nervous. I wanted her to like me. I wanted to be accepted into their family, not because I lacked one, but because family has always meant so much to me. Linda was complicated. She wasn't outright cruel at first, but she carried herself with this air of superiority that made me feel like I had to prove myself. She'd compliment me one second, then make a joking remark the next that felt like a slap in the face. Example? Once, when Daniel and I invited her over for dinner, I cooked lasagna from scratch. She smiled and said, "This is good, Kate," though. Of course, Daniel grew up eating my lasagna, so his taste buds might never quite adjust. She said it with a laugh, but her eyes stayed cold. Daniel laughed along, completely oblivious to the sting behind her words. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself it was just her way of being, that maybe she was protective of her son, and Daniel was worth it. At least, that's what I thought. Over time, my relationship with Daniel deepened. We moved in together after a year, and those first months felt like the honeymoon phase everyone talks about. We painted the walls of our little apartment ourselves, spilling paint everywhere and laughing until our stomachs hurt. We shared grocery runs, late-night movie marathons, and all the tiny domestic moments that make you feel like, yeah, this is my person. But Linda, she was always there, calling at odd hours, popping in unannounced, making little comments about how Daniel looked too skinny or how he needed a real meal. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning to find Daniel on the phone with her, whispering in the kitchen so as not to wake me. He said it was nothing, but deep down, I knew her presence in his life wasn't going to fade into the background just because he had me. I kept reminding myself that marriage is about compromise. Love is about patience. I convinced myself that if I just tried harder, cooked better, cleaned more, smiled wider, eventually she'd accept me. Eventually, she'd see that I loved her son as much as she did. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can twist yourself into knots trying to please someone, and it still won't be enough if they've already decided you're the enemy. Looking back now, I can see the cracks that were forming even then, cracks I ignored because I wanted so desperately for the picture of my life to stay perfect. I wanted the story of Kate and Daniel to be the one that ended happily ever after, but fairy tales don't account for meddling mothers-in-law. And the worst part? Daniel's loyalty was starting to waver in ways I didn't recognize until it was almost too late. At first, I thought maybe I was overthinking things. That was always my weakness, analyzing every word, every glance, every silence until I twisted myself into knots. But over time, I realized it wasn't just in my head. Linda wasn't just close to Daniel. She was entangled in his life in a way that felt unnatural for a man in his late 20s. She'd call him every morning on his commute to work, every evening before bed, and sometimes 2 or 3 times in between just to check in. I remember one night in particular, Daniel and I were curled up on the couch, halfway through a movie. The lights were dim, my head was resting on his chest, and for once, everything felt peaceful. Then his phone lit up. "Mom. Just let it go to voicemail," I whispered, trying to hold on to the moment. But he untangled himself from me like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. "It'll just be quick," he said. "You know how she worries." I sat there in the dark, watching the glow of his phone illuminate his face as he laughed softly into the receiver, voice low and intimate in a way that made me feel like the outsider. That night, the movie ended without me even realizing it, my mind too full of questions I didn't dare ask. My friends started to notice too. Over brunch one weekend, my best friend Sophie leaned across the table, lowering her voice. "Kate, I don't want to be harsh, but does it ever bother you that Daniel is still so tied to his mom?" I fiddled with my coffee cup, staring at the swirl of cream. "She's just protective. I mean, she raised him alone after his dad passed. I get it." Sophie arched an eyebrow. "Protective is one thing, but calling him 5 times a day? Showing up uninvited? Girl, that's not protective, that's possessive." I laughed it off, brushing away the weight of her words, but deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. Still, admitting it out loud felt like betraying Daniel. Things got worse when we started talking about buying a house. It should have been one of the most exciting milestones of our lives, scrolling through listings, dreaming about neighborhoods, arguing playfully about whether we wanted a fixer-upper or something turnkey, but every decision was overshadowed by Linda's opinions. "I just think you two should live closer to me," she said one evening when we had dinner at her place. She poured Daniel another glass of wine like I wasn't even there. "That way, if anything happens, you'll be right nearby." Daniel smiled sheepishly, like a little boy caught sneaking cookies. "It would be nice, Mom, you know, Sunday dinners and all that." I forced a smile, my nails digging into my palm under the table. "We're looking at places near my work. Actually, the commute would be easier." Her smile tightened. "Well, of course, your job matters, but Daniel works hard too. It wouldn't be fair to make his life more difficult, would it?" The words hit me like a slap, even though she said them sweetly. "And Daniel?" He just nodded, like it made perfect sense. The more time passed, the more invisible I felt. If I suggested something, it was second-guessed. If Linda suggested it, it was law. She didn't just hover, she inserted herself into our finances, our routines, even our arguments. Sometimes I'd be in the middle of telling Daniel how I felt about something, and his phone would buzz with a text from her. He'd read it instantly, eyes darting away, my words hanging in the air like they didn't matter. I started to feel like I wasn't in a marriage, I was in a triangle, and no matter how much I loved Daniel, I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that I was always going to be runner-up to his mother. One night, I broke. We were lying in bed, the room heavy with silence, and I whispered into the darkness, "Do you even see me anymore, Daniel?" He turned to me, confused. "What do you mean?" "You run to her for everything. Her opinion matters more than mine. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a placeholder until she needs you again." His face hardened. "That's not fair, Kate. She's my mom. She's been there my whole life. You knew what you were getting into when you married me." The words cut deeper than he probably realized. Because no, I hadn't known. I hadn't known that marrying Daniel meant marrying into a rivalry I hadn't signed up for. I thought love would be enough, that if I just held on tight enough, we'd weather it. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. Love can't grow in a shadow, and Linda's shadow was stretching across every corner of our life. And little did I know, the storm was only beginning. It happened on a rainy Saturday, the kind of day where the sky feels heavy, and the sound of water hitting the windows makes you want to curl up and forget the world exists. I had planned a quiet day with Daniel, just us, no interruptions. I even cooked breakfast, pancakes, bacon, fresh orange juice, trying to create some semblance of intimacy that had been missing. We were halfway through eating when the knock came. At first, I thought it might be the neighbors, maybe a package delivery, but then I heard her voice. "Danny, it's me. Open up, sweetheart. My stomach sank. I hadn't invited her, and Daniel hadn't mentioned she was coming. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth, then jumped up like a soldier answering a call. Mom, what are you doing here? He asked as he opened the door. Linda swept inside like she owned the place, umbrella dripping water onto the floor. She kissed Daniel on the cheek, then looked at me like I was the maid instead of his wife. I was in the neighborhood, she said casually, pulling off her coat. Thought I'd surprise you too with some homemade soup. I know Danny gets tired of takeout. Her eyes flicked toward my pancakes. I clenched my jaw. It's not takeout. I cooked. Oh, she smiled tightly. That's nice. Then she turned back to Daniel. You still like my chicken noodle best, don't you, honey? Daniel laughed awkwardly. Yeah, Mom, of course. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I bit my tongue. I told myself not to ruin the morning, not to make it into a scene, but then she did something that tipped me over the edge. She walked straight into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and started rearranging things. Mom, what are you doing? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She glanced over her shoulder. Oh, nothing, just making room for the soup. You don't need all this soda, Kate. Danny shouldn't be drinking that anyway. It was like a stranger had reached into my chest and twisted my heart. That's our fridge, I snapped. You don't get to come in here, Anne. Kate, Daniel cut me off, his voice low. Warning, don't start. I stared at him. Don't start? I was standing in my own kitchen, watching his mother tear through my fridge like it was hers, and he was telling me not to start? Linda smirked, like she'd won. Danny, maybe you should come help me in here. You know how particular I am about where things go. And he did. He followed her into the kitchen like a trained dog. I sat there alone at the table, the pancakes cold, the orange juice sweating on the counter. Something inside me snapped. I marched into the kitchen, slammed the fridge door shut, and said, enough. They both froze. Daniel's eyes widened. Linda's lips pursed. This is my house too, I said, my voice trembling but steady. You don't get to just walk in here and rearrange everything, Linda. You don't get to act like I'm invisible. Her expression shifted instantly, saccharine sweet but laced with venom. Oh, Kate, I didn't mean to upset you. I was only trying to help, you know, make sure Danny's taken care of. My voice cracked. I take care of him. That's my job, not yours. The silence that followed was deafening. The clock ticked on the wall. The rain pounded harder, and Daniel finally spoke. Kate, she's just trying to be nice, don't overreact. I turned to him, tears burning in my eyes. Overreact? She shows up uninvited, undermines me in my own home, and you're telling me I'm overreacting? Linda sighed dramatically, placing a hand on her chest. Danny, I don't want to come between you two. If she feels threatened by me. Threatened? I laughed bitterly. You've been undermining me since the day I met you. That's when Daniel snapped. Enough, Kate. She's my mother. She's been there for me my whole life. If you can't respect her, what does that say about you? The words hit me harder than a slap. My knees felt weak. I stared at him, at the man I married, and for the first time, I saw it clearly, he wasn't on my side. Linda placed a comforting hand on his arm, like she'd orchestrated the whole thing. It's all right, honey, she just doesn't understand our bond. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my keys and stormed out, the rain soaking me instantly. My chest ached, my throat burned, but I couldn't stay in that house another second. Because in that moment, I realized something devastating. It wasn't just me versus Linda. It was me versus Linda and Daniel, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep fighting a battle I was destined to lose. I didn't come home until late that night. I drove aimlessly, windshield wipers beating against the storm, my thoughts louder than the thunder outside. By the time I finally pulled into the driveway, my body was shaking, partly from the cold, partly from the realization that the marriage I thought I had wasn't the marriage I was living. When I stepped inside, Daniel was waiting. He was sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The living room was dark except for the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. He looked up when he heard me shut the door. Where have you been? His voice was sharp, but his eyes were tired. Driving, I said flatly, dripping water onto the hardwood, trying to calm down. Kate, you can't just storm out like that. Mom was upset. I laughed bitterly, dropping my soaked jacket onto the floor. She was upset? Daniel, do you even hear yourself? She barges in, disrespects me in my own home, and I'm the one who has to tiptoe around her feelings? His jaw tightened. You don't understand. She didn't mean anything by it. That's just how she is. I stared at him, the disbelief so strong it almost choked me. That's the excuse for everything, isn't it? That's just how she is. And what about me, Daniel? Who's making excuses for me when I'm the one she's tearing down every time she opens her mouth? The air between us thickened. He stood and ran a hand through his hair. You're blowing this out of proportion. She just wants to feel included in our lives. Included? My voice cracked, raw with anger. Daniel, she doesn't want to be included, she wants to be in control. And you're letting her take over our marriage. He didn't respond. He just stared at me, silent, like maybe if he said nothing, I'd eventually wear myself out. The silence broke something inside me. You know what hurts the most? I whispered. It's not her, Daniel. It's you. Because every single time she undermines me, you let her. You choose her over me. And I can't keep pretending that doesn't destroy me a little more every day. His face softened then, just for a moment, like he wanted to reach for me, but instead he sank back onto the couch. She's my mom, Kate. I can't turn my back on her. I felt my throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. And I'm your wife. When are you going to stop turning your back on me? The words hung in the air, sharp and unmovable. I walked past him, straight to our bedroom, and shut the door. For the next few days, the house felt like a war zone without explosions. Silence became our weapon of choice. We moved around each other like ghosts, polite, distant, never touching. When we did speak, it was short, clipped sentences that carried more weight than any shouting match could. Then came the dinner invitation. Linda wanted us over at her house the following Sunday. I told Daniel I wasn't going. She'll take it personally, he said, his voice tight. Good, I snapped. Maybe she should. Maybe she should finally understand that she can't keep walking all over me. Daniel slammed his hand on the counter, making me jump. Why do you always have to make this so hard? She's my family, Kate. And what am I? My voice shook, tears spilling freely now. What am I to you? Because right now, I don't feel like your partner. I feel like the other woman in your marriage to your mother. His face went pale, like I had slapped him. That's not fair, he whispered. No, I said softly, brokenly. What's not fair is asking me to keep shrinking myself just so she can shine. What's not fair is marrying me and then making me compete for a place in your life. I walked away before he could respond, locking myself in the bathroom and pressing my hands against the sink, staring at my reflection through blurry eyes. My cheeks were flushed, my hair damp from tears, and in that moment, I barely recognized myself. I wasn't the confident, independent woman my mother raised. I wasn't the nurturing, patient friend everyone once leaned on. I was a shadow, slowly disappearing under the weight of someone else's control. And for the first time, a terrifying thought crept into my mind. Maybe love wasn't going to be enough to fix this. It was supposed to be just another Sunday. I had already told Daniel I wasn't going to his mom's for dinner, but he'd begged me to come just this once, promising he'd run interference if things got uncomfortable. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I told myself maybe it would be different this time. Maybe he'd finally see what I'd been dealing with. The moment we walked into Linda's house, I knew I'd made a mistake. She had set the table like it was Thanksgiving, candles burning, wine already poured, but what hit me hardest wasn't the food or the setting, it was the way she looked at me, like I was a trespasser in her kingdom. Kate, she said with a tight smile, you came. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to tear yourself away from whatever it is you do on Sundays. Daniel laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Mom, come on. But she wasn't done. She turned to him and said, loud enough for me to hear, I honestly didn't think she'd last this long, but I suppose you're loyal to a fault. My breath caught in my chest. I glanced at Daniel, waiting for him to defend me, but he just sighed, like this was normal, like this was okay. Dinner started tense and only got worse. Every time I spoke, Linda found a way to twist my words. If I complimented the food, she reminded me that Daniel grew up on her recipes. If I mentioned my work, she suggested I should consider cutting back to focus on supporting Daniel more. Finally, after she made some snide remark about how her marriage had lasted decades because she always knew when to put her husband first, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Linda," I said, my fork clattering onto the plate, "do you even hear yourself? You act like I'm some outsider stealing your son away. But I'm his wife. I love him, and I'm not going to keep sitting here while you tear me down in front of him." The room went silent. Daniel froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Linda's eyes narrowed, her sweet mask slipping. "Well," she said slowly, venom lacing her voice, "at least you finally admit it. That's exactly what you've done, Kate. You've taken him from me. You've changed him, and not for the better." My stomach dropped. "That's not true." "Oh, isn't it?" She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto mine like a predator. "He used to call me every morning. Now sometimes he doesn't. He used to come over every weekend. Now I get excuses. And you think that's love? That's control." I felt my whole body tremble. "I'm not controlling him. I just want a marriage where his loyalty is with me, not split down the middle." Linda scoffed. "Marriage doesn't erase family, Kate. Blood comes first, always." I turned to Daniel, desperate. "Say something, please." But he just sat there, torn, his lips pressed into a thin line, and that silence, his silence, said everything. Something inside me cracked. "So that's it? You're okay with her sitting here, accusing me of ruining your life?" "Kate," he started, but Linda cut him off. "Danny, you don't need to explain yourself to her. She'll never understand our bond." And then she did the one thing that broke me entirely. She reached across the table and took his hand right in front of me, like a wife would, like I didn't exist. That was it. I shoved my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood with an ear-splitting screech. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking but loud. I'm done. I'm done sitting here, begging for scraps of respect from someone who clearly hates me, and I'm done watching my husband let it happen." Daniel stood quickly, panic in his eyes. "Kate, wait." But I was already at the door. My chest was heaving, my hands trembling as I grabbed my coat. "You made your choice, Daniel, and it wasn't me." I slammed the door behind me, the cold night air biting at my skin. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, my heart racing so hard it felt like it might burst. And for the first time since I'd married him, I felt completely and utterly alone. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the sound of rain still echoing in my ears even though it had stopped hours ago. My body felt heavy, like grief had settled in my bones. Daniel came home late. I heard the door open, the shuffle of his shoes on the mat, the faint creak of the floorboards as he moved through the dark house. For a while, he didn't come into the bedroom. He lingered in the living room, maybe hoping I was asleep so he wouldn't have to face me. Eventually, the door creaked open, and he stood there in the doorway like a guilty child. His silhouette was tall, but his shoulders slumped. "Kate," he said softly, "can we talk?" I sat up, my arms crossed over my chest. "Go ahead." He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "I'm sorry about tonight. I didn't know she was going to say those things." My laugh was sharp, bitter. "Daniel, she always says those things. That's not new. What's new is me finally standing up for myself while you sat there and let her tear me apart." He flinched. "I didn't want to make it worse." "Worse?" I snapped. "How could it be worse than watching your mother tell me I'm controlling, that I've ruined your life, that I don't belong? And you just sat there. You let her hold your hand like," my voice cracked, "like I wasn't even in the room." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "She's my mom, Kate. What do you expect me to do? Cut her off? Ignore her? She's been there for me my whole life." "And I'm your wife," I shouted, the words tearing out of me. "You promised me forever. You stood in front of me, in front of everyone we love, and swore to choose me, and every time it matters, you choose her instead." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could hear his breathing, shallow and uneven. like he was searching for the right words but finding none. Finally, he whispered, "I don't want to lose either of you." Something inside me broke at that, because I realized he didn't see the truth, that by refusing to choose, he was already losing me. I turned away, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "Daniel, I can't keep living like this. I can't keep fighting for a place in my own marriage. If you don't draw a line, there won't be a marriage left to fight for." He didn't answer. He just stood there, silent and torn, until the weight of it all drove him out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left in the dark, crying quietly into my pillow. The next morning, I tried to go about life like normal, but nothing felt normal. Daniel made coffee, like he always did, but we barely spoke. The silence was worse than any shouting. It was like we were both waiting for the other to break, to give in, to make it right, but neither of us moved. Later that week, Sophie invited me out for drinks. I almost said no, but she insisted. "You need a break, Kate. You're disappearing into this marriage. Come out and remember who you are." At the bar, under the dim glow of string lights, I finally spilled everything. From the fridge incident to the dinner to the way Daniel's silence cut me deeper than Linda's insults ever could. Sophie listened, her eyes wide, her hand gripping mine tightly. "Kate," she said when I finished, her voice firm, "this isn't just tension with a mother-in-law. This is emotional neglect. You're begging for scraps of loyalty from your own husband. That's not love, that's survival." Her words hit me like a tidal wave, because deep down, I knew she was right. I was surviving, not living. That night, I came home and found Daniel on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I turned it off, forcing him to look at me. "Daniel," I said quietly but firmly, "something has to change. I can't keep being second place in my own marriage. Either you stand up for me, or I don't know if we can keep doing this." He swallowed hard, his eyes full of fear. "You're asking me to choose." "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm asking you to honor the choice you already made when you married me." The silence that followed felt endless. I could see the war in his eyes, the pull between his past and his present, between his mother and his wife. And for the first time, I realized he might not be strong enough to choose me. I didn't think things could get worse after that night, but I was wrong. It started small, like it always did. A few days after our fight, Linda began dropping by again. No warning, no call, just knocking at odd hours with her famous casseroles or bags of groceries. Daniel never told her to stop. He'd smile, thank her, and I'd stand there, clenching my jaw while she unpacked her food into our fridge. But then it escalated. One afternoon, I came home from work, exhausted, dreaming of nothing more than a hot shower and bed. As I walked up the driveway, I froze. Linda's car was in the driveway. I walked inside and found her in my kitchen, wearing rubber gloves, scrubbing the counters. Daniel was at the table, sipping coffee like this was the most normal thing in the world. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, dropping my bag on the floor. Linda turned with a sweet smile. "Oh, Kate, you're home. I thought I'd help out around here. You know, deep clean the way Danny likes it." I felt my blood boil. "This is my house. You don't just walk in here and start rearranging my life." Daniel stood quickly, defensive. "She was just trying to help. Kate, you've been working so much lately. Don't you dare," I snapped, my voice trembling. "Don't you dare make it sound like I can't manage my own home. This isn't help. This is invasion." Linda peeled off her gloves with a satisfied smirk. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but someone has to make sure things are done right." The implication hit me like a dagger. I wasn't enough. But that wasn't even the worst of it. A week later, I got home to find a stack of paperwork on the kitchen table. Mortgage documents. My name wasn't on them. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking, until I realized what I was looking at. Linda had offered to help Daniel refinance the mortgage, behind my back, without me. "Daniel," I whispered, my chest tightening, "what is this?" He looked up from the couch, guilt flashing across his face. "It's nothing, just an idea Mom had. She said if she co-signed, we could get better rates." I slammed the papers onto the table, my voice rising. "Better rates? Are you kidding me? You were going to tie our home to your mother, without even talking to me? He stood, running a hand through his hair. Kate, calm down. It's just numbers on paper. Nothing's finalized. Calm down? My voice cracked, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. This isn't just numbers, Daniel. This is my life, our life, and you're handing it over to her like I don't even exist. That's when Linda walked in, holding a folder like she was closing a business deal. I told him it was the smart move. She said smoothly, if you're going to build a future, Kate, you need someone with experience, and honestly, you should be thanking me. I'm saving you both money. I spun toward her, my entire body shaking. You don't get to do this. You don't get to walk into my marriage, my home, my finances, and act like you're the one in charge. Her lips curled into a smug smile. If I didn't, who would? You. I couldn't breathe. My chest heaved as I turned to Daniel. Tell me this isn't happening. Tell me you're not actually considering this. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and in that hesitation, that endless, suffocating silence, I had my answer. I grabbed the papers and threw them onto the floor, pages scattering across the kitchen tiles. I'm done, I whispered. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than any scream ever could. I'm done being disrespected in my own life. Daniel reached for me, panic flashing in his eyes. Kate, wait. But I stepped back, shaking my head. No, Daniel, you wait, because if you can't stand up for me now, when it matters most, then maybe you never will. And with that, I walked out the door, slamming it behind me, my heart pounding like a war drum. For the first time, I wasn't just angry, I was terrified, because the woman who raised me had taught me to be independent, to never lose myself for anyone. And yet here I was, watching myself disappear piece by piece, and realizing I might not be able to claw my way back. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly for nearly an hour before pulling into the parking lot of a quiet diner just off the highway. The neon sign buzzed faintly, and the smell of burnt coffee and fried food hit me as soon as I walked in. I slid into a booth in the corner, clutching my phone in my hand like a lifeline. For 10 whole minutes, I stared at the screen, debating. Then I finally dialed Sophie. She picked up on the second ring. Kate, are you okay? It's late. And just like that, my resolve cracked. My voice came out in a shaky whisper. No, I'm not okay. Within 20 minutes, Sophie was there, sliding into the booth across from me, her eyes full of worry. She didn't even order anything, she just reached across the table and held my hand. Tell me, she said softly. So I did. I told her everything, the mortgage papers, the constant boundary crossing, the way Daniel froze when I begged him to choose me. Just once, my words tumbled out between tears and shallow breaths, until I felt wrung out, empty. When I finally stopped, Sophie squeezed my hand tighter. Kate, this isn't normal. This isn't marriage. This is you drowning while he holds the rope for his mother instead of you. Her words sank into me like ice water, because deep down, I knew she was right. I stayed at Sophie's that night, curled up on her couch under a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender detergent. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's hesitation, that flicker of guilt that told me he knew he was wrong, but still couldn't let go of his mother. The next morning, I called my mom. I didn't mean to cry as soon as she picked up, but the second I heard her voice, the dam burst. Sweetheart, what's wrong? She asked, panic rising. Mom, I sobbed, I don't think I can do this anymore. She was quiet for a long moment, then said gently, do what, Kate? Be married to someone who doesn't choose me, who doesn't even see me. There was a pause, then my mother spoke with the kind of quiet strength only she had. Kate, you were raised to be strong, not to be someone's shadow. Marriage is about partnership. If you're the only one fighting, that's not partnership, that's prison. Her words wrapped around me like a shield. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, whispering, but what if leaving means I'm giving up? What if he changes and I'll regret it? Change has to come from him, she said firmly, and until it does, you have to protect yourself, because, sweetheart, you're already disappearing in this. The truth of it made my stomach twist. That afternoon, I went back to the house to grab some clothes. The silence was heavy when I walked in. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, the scattered mortgage papers now neatly stacked in front of him. His eyes lifted when he saw me, full of exhaustion. "Kate," he started, his voice breaking, "please don't leave." I froze in the doorway, my duffel bag dangling from my hand. "I already have, Daniel. You just didn't notice." He stood, running a hand through his hair. "I messed up. I know I did, but you can't just walk away from us." "Us?" I laughed bitterly, though it sounded more like a sob. "There hasn't been an us in months. It's been you and your mother. I've just been in the way." His face crumpled, but I couldn't let myself soften. "Not this time. Until you can stand up for me," I said quietly. "I can't stand beside you. I won't." The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, I turned, walked upstairs, and stuffed clothes into my bag. My hands shook the whole time. I wasn't sure if I was strong or if I was breaking apart, but I knew one thing: if I stayed, I'd lose myself completely. When I left, Daniel didn't follow. He just stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching me walk out the door with eyes that looked haunted. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to clarity. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was the first step. Because sometimes, you don't realize how badly you've been suffocating until you finally take a breath.